In the winter of 1874, the Missouri Ozarks kept a secret so disturbing, even the oldest mountain folk refused to speak of it after sundown. It began with a funeral portrait, a simple photograph meant to preserve the memory of a dead child. But when the photographer developed the plate, the boy's eyes weren't closed. They were open, and he was looking directly at the camera, breathing. Locals whispered that the Holloway family was cursed long before the photo was taken, long before the strange sickness, the nightly tapping on the cabin windows, and long before the Holloway twins started waking up with dirt under their fingernails and someone else's voice in their throats. Because the Holloways didn't just bury their dead, they buried something else with them, something that never stopped crawling back. This is the story the Ozarks tried to erase. A story about a boy who died twice and a photograph that proved he never stayed dead. What happened in that cabin on Blackthorn Ridge wasn't human. And what the Holloway twins brought back from the grave still haunts those woods to this day. If you think you know what fear is, you haven't heard this story yet. If you ever come across an old photograph, one that looks too still, too quiet, too perfectly staged, don't stare at the eyes for too long. Because sometimes, what looks dead is simply waiting. And in 1874, in the forgotten depths of the Missouri Ozarks, a photographer captured something he should have run from the moment his lens focused. A moment that destroyed a family, cursed an entire town, and left behind a portrait that people swear still moves if you look at it at midnight. This is the story the Holloway family tried to bury, a story local archives refused to store, a story so disturbing that the original photograph was reportedly burned, but copies keep reappearing. The Holloway cabin sat deep in the Ozark woods, among pines that never stopped whispering. That cold October morning, mist rolled along the ground like smoke, thick enough to swallow boot prints. Inside the cabin, two brothers lay in a small wooden bed. Thomas and Elijah Holloway, identical twins. 8 years old, born 30 minutes apart. And now, one of them was dead. That's what the family believed. Mrs. Holloway sat by the bedside, her eyes red, her hands trembling around a cracked Bible. Thomas lay cold and still, his skin pale like wet paper. Elijah sat beside him, refusing to move, refusing to blink, whispering, "Tommy ain't gone. He just sleepin'. He promised he'd wake up if I stayed right here." His voice was so soft it barely stirred the dust in the room. Their father stepped out to fetch the traveling photographer who visited towns to take morning portraits, a disturbing but common practice. Families wanted to remember the dead, to capture their stillness forever. But the Holloways had no idea they were inviting something far darker into their home. When the photographer arrived, a thin man with sunken eyes and a coat too long for his frame, he walked into the cabin and froze. Not because of the dead child, but because Elijah, the living twin, was staring at him with an expression he couldn't place. Something between fear and a warning. "Sir," the photographer said, adjusting his tripod, "I'll need the living child to step aside." Elijah shook his head violently. "No, I ain't leaving him. He don't like being alone." Mrs. Holloway gently lifted Elijah and set him on a chair in the corner. He started crying, not loudly, but in broken gasps like he couldn't catch his breath. The photographer positioned Thomas's body upright. Back straight, head slightly tilted, eyes closed. Like all funeral portraits of the era, he covered his head with the cloth, leaned into his camera, and froze. Thomas's hand twitched. He blinked hard. Looked again. The boy's hand lay still. Maybe it was his imagination. He had seen strange things in death photography before. Reflexes, muscle tightening, shadows that played tricks. He tried again. Adjust the focus. Center the frame. Hold still. Then, a sudden breath escaped Thomas's lips. A soft, shaky exhale, like the end of a nightmare. The photographer jerked back so violently, he hit his head on the beam above. You saw that, didn't you?" he whispered. Mrs. Holloway didn't answer. She was staring at her son with a horror that only a mother can feel. "Tommy," she whispered. Elijah screamed from the corner. I told you he ain't dead." The father stormed forward, grabbing Thomas's cold shoulders, shaking him. But Thomas's body only slumped to one side. Silence. The photographer swallowed hard and forced himself to return to his equipment. I should get this over with. Bodies can release air after death. It ain't unnatural, but he didn't believe that. Not anymore. He steadied his camera. On 3, 1, 2. Thomas's eyes opened. Wide. Alive. Focused directly into the lens, as if he were looking straight through it, straight into the photographer's soul. Mrs. Holloway collapsed. Elijah screamed Thomas's name. The father stumbled backward, but Thomas didn't move otherwise. He didn't sit up. He didn't breathe deeply. He simply stared, unblinking. The photographer fled from behind the cloth, tripping over his tripod. How was he doing that? Elijah rushed to the bedside, grabbing his twin's cold hand. Thomas's lips parted. Not dead stiff, not frozen, They moved, and he whispered, barely, but clear enough to freeze every living soul in that room. Don't let him take another picture. The photographer's blood went cold. Why? Why not, child? Thomas's eyes rolled. Slow, unnatural. He's not the one following you, Thomas whispered. It's the thing that came with him. The cabin door slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls, and something shifted in the shadows. Slow. Deliberate. Watching. The photographer backed away, shaking so badly he almost dropped his equipment. Elijah held his brother, crying. Mrs. Holloway prayed. The father reached for the rifle above the fireplace. And Thomas, dead or alive, kept staring at the door, whispering a name that no one recognized. Harrow. The lights flickered. The shadows tightened. The air grew icy, and the photographer finally understood. This wasn't a funeral portrait. This was a warning, a curse, and he had already triggered it. The cabin door shook again, not from wind, but from something breathing on the other side. The wooden boards groaned as if a weight pressed against them, a slow, dragging pressure that made every nail creak. The father raised his rifle shakily. Who's out there? Show yourself. But Elijah grabbed his arm, tears streaking down his cheeks. It ain't a who, Pa. It's what Tommy saw. Thomas's eyes, still unnaturally wide, followed the movement of something invisible gliding beneath the cracks of the door. A shadow that didn't match anything in the room. A shape that crawled like smoke, but moved like it had bones. Thomas whispered. He followed the photographer. He's been following him a long time. The photographer's breath caught in his throat. I don't know what the boy means. I ain't done nothing wrong. Thomas's lips twisted into a broken smile. Not his smile. Not a child's smile. He likes when you say that. The father clicked the rifle hammer back. The door bowed inward, boards bending as if something was pushing from the outside or trying to force its way in. Mrs. Holloway screamed and backed toward the fireplace. God help us, that thing ain't human. The door suddenly stopped shaking. Silence fell. The kind of silence that feels alive. Then, slowly, inch by inch, the doorknob began to turn. Not fast, not violent, but deliberate, as if whatever stood outside knew exactly how fear worked and was savoring every second. The father aimed the rifle. Stay back. You hear me? I'll put a bullet through whoever you are. The photographer stuttered, losing color in his face. Don't open it. I've seen things, strange things, ever since Arkansas, ever since I took that picture in Little Rock. Thomas finished his sentence. The picture that wasn't empty, even though the room was. The photographer's knees buckled. How could you know about that? Thomas blinked once, slowly. When you pointed your camera into that empty room, you thought you were alone, but he was standing right behind you. The doorknob clicked, and the door swung open, not quickly, not loudly, but silently, as if the hinges weighed nothing. The father fired. The gunshot echoed through the cabin, shaking dust from the rafters, but the bullet passed through empty air. There was no one at the entrance. No footprints, no figure, nothing. Just a night so dark it looked like the woods had swallowed the world whole. Mrs. Holloway whispered shakily. Is it gone? Thomas whispered back. He's already inside. The candle flames bent sideways, as if a strong breath passed through the room. Elijah felt a cold hand brush the back of his neck and shrieked, crawling under the bed. The father swung the rifle around wildly. Where is it? Show yourself. The photographer covered his mouth, tears forming. He followed me from Little Rock, then to Batesville, then into these woods. Every photo I take, every town I visit, he comes closer. Thomas's voice dropped into a low, unnatural tone. He doesn't want your life. Not yet. He wants your lens. Your light. Your shadow. The photographer stumbled back until he hit the table. My lens? Why my lens? Thomas turned his head, slowly, too slowly for a human neck, toward the camera. He wants to be seen. The lantern beside the window flickered violently, then died. Complete darkness swallowed the cabin. No moonlight, no glow, nothing. In the pitch black, Elijah screamed. Mrs. Holloway sobbed. The father shouted for everyone to stay still, and beneath their cries, another sound began rising. Breathing, deep, slow, right next to them, but not human. A wet, rattling inhale, followed by a long, vibrating exhale that shook the window glass. The photographer whispered, oh God, he's right next to me. Thomas's voice came through the darkness, no longer childlike at all. Don't move. Don't turn. He doesn't like being looked at without permission. The breathing grew louder, so close it sounded like it was coming from inches away. Something cold brushed the photographer's cheek like a finger made of ice and bone. He couldn't breathe. Couldn't scream. Couldn't even think. Thomas spoke again, his voice echoing inside everyone's skulls. If you want us to live, you must take his picture. The photographer froze. What do you mean? How? I can't even see. The breathing stopped. Silence. Then, a whisper slid through the darkness, spoken by a voice no human throat could produce. Look at me. The photographer felt a presence rise in front of him. Huge, towering, wrong in every possible way. And he knew, if he opened his eyes now, he would never close them again. The air inside the cabin grew colder, so cold that frost began forming on the edges of the furniture. Mrs. Holloway's breath came out in white shivers. Elijah whimpered under the bed, teeth chattering. The photographer clutched his camera to his chest, terrified to raise it, terrified not to. He whispered, I can't take a picture in the dark. I can't even see him, Thomas answered calmly. You don't need to see him. He sees you. The photographer's knees buckled. There was a faint scraping sound, like nails dragging across old wood, moving in a slow circle around him. Then another breath, closer, heavier, warmer than a human's. The photographer felt something lean close enough that he could hear skin stretching or splitting, he couldn't tell. Mrs. Holloway sobbed. This is the devil's work! This is the devil's, Thomas snapped. Quiet. His voice didn't sound human anymore. The photographer swallowed hard. What is it? What is in this cabin with us? Thomas replied. He's been watching families for a long time. Watching them live. Watching them mourn. Watching them die. He is drawn to sorrow, to grief, to fear. The scraping stopped behind the photographer. The breath hovered at his ear. He doesn't belong to you, Thomas continued. He doesn't even belong to this world. But when you took that picture in Arkansas, your camera caught his outline. It trapped a piece of his shadow. The photographer trembled violently. I didn't know, I swear. A hand, long, impossibly cold, clamped down on the photographer's shoulder. He gasped, paralyzed by terror. Thomas whispered, he wants his shadow back. The photographer's fingers shook as he slowly raised the camera to his chest, trying not to move too fast. Trying not to anger whatever had its hand on him. What happens if I don't? Thomas's answer was soft. He'll take something else. A low rumble vibrated through the wooden floorboards. Elijah screamed from under the bed. Mrs. Holloway pulled her son out, clutching him tightly. The father stood near the door, rifle trembling in his hands. The photographer forced his thumb toward the shutter, but before he could, the cabin filled with a sudden flash. White light exploded from outside, pouring through the window cracks. Not lightning, not lantern flame, something brighter. Something wrong. The father yelled, "What the hell is that?" Thomas covered his eyes, hissing, "He doesn't want light. Put it out." But the light wasn't coming from inside. It came from the woods. The photographer turned, slowly, terrified, toward the window. And in that split second, the light illuminated something standing directly in front of the glass. Something enormous. Something bent. Something whose skin looked stretched too thin, bones pressing against its surface like they wanted to escape. A face leaned into the window, if it could be called a face. It had no eyes. Just deep hollows. A slit for a nose, and a mouth slightly open, revealing too many teeth. Teeth shaped like fingers. The creature tilted its head, the motion slow and unnatural, and smiled. The photographer screamed. The light vanished. Darkness snapped back into place. The window shattered inward. Something climbed through. The father fired the rifle again, but the bullet passed straight through the thing as if it wasn't made of flesh at all. Thomas stood perfectly still in the darkness. "He likes you now," he whispered. The creature moved on all fours, but its limbs bent the wrong way, like someone had assembled it in a hurry without understanding anatomy. It sniffed the floorboards, sniffed the air, sniffed people. Then it stopped, right in front of Thomas. Mrs. Holloway screamed, "Stay away from him! Stay away from my boy!" But Thomas didn't move. He slowly lifted his chin. His eyes, wide, glassy, reflected nothing. "He isn't here for me," Thomas whispered. He pointed at the photographer. "He's here for him, because he took the first picture. And now, he wants to take the last." The creature rose to full height, its head scraping the cabin ceiling. It opened its mouth wider, too wide for bone, too wide for nature, and breathed out a thick, black vapor that slithered along the floor toward the photographer's feet. The father screamed, "Run! Run!" But Thomas laughed softly. "There's nowhere to run. This is his house now." The photographer backed into the corner, camera shaking in his hands, and the creature bent down, face inches from his, teeth clicking like small bones breaking. The photographer closed his eyes and pressed the shutter. Click! A blast of white light filled the cabin. The creature recoiled with an inhuman shriek, a sound that shattered every remaining window. When the flash faded, the creature was gone, but so was the photograph. The plate inside the camera had been burned black, as if something had pressed its entire weight against the image. Elijah crawled out from under the bed, trembling. "Did you kill it?" Thomas answered for him. No. You didn't kill him. He looked toward the door. The darkness beyond somehow thicker than before. You only made him angry. The photographer staggered backward, clutching his ruined camera as if it were the only thing keeping him alive. The glass plate inside was scorched black, burned from the inside out. Mrs. Holloway fell to her knees, sobbing into Elijah's hair. The father pressed his back against the door, whispering prayers he hadn't spoken in years. The cabin was a cage now, and the woods outside were breathing. Thomas sat perfectly still in the rocking chair, his legs dangling, his eyes rolled slightly upward like he was listening to something far above them. The photographer's voice cracked. What does he want? Why is he following me? Thomas blinked slowly, a motion too smooth to be natural. It's not you. It's the picture. The photographer's heart dropped. Which picture? Thomas tilted his head sideways, unnaturally far, the neck straining like wet rope. The first one. The man swallowed. The picture from Arkansas? The abandoned room? Thomas nodded once. You weren't alone when you took it. When the flash lit that room, it lit him. The photographer felt sick. There was no one in that room. Thomas's mouth twitched into a thin, unsettling smile. He doesn't stand in rooms. He stands between them. A gust of cold wind slammed against the cabin walls, making the boards shudder like something massive was brushing against them. Elijah whispered, Pa, is he out there? Is he waiting for us? Thomas answered without emotion. He doesn't wait. Mrs. Holloway's voice shook. Then what's he doing? Thomas turned his eyes toward the window. The moonlight outside flickered, as if something huge passed in front of it. He's choosing. The father raised his rifle again. No one has taken my family. Not while I'm breathing. Thomas didn't look away from the window. He doesn't want your breath. The photographer wiped his shaking hands on his shirt. I destroyed the plate. Shouldn't that make him stop? Thomas's expression sharpened, for the first time showing something like fear. You didn't destroy anything. He pointed to the scorched camera. He ate it. The photographer stared at the blackened metal. Ate it? Ate the picture? Ate the shadow inside? Before he could speak, something hit the cabin roof, hard enough to rain dust from the rafters. Elijah screamed. Mrs. Holloway covered him with her body. The father fired upward. Another hit. Something crawling across the shingles. Something heavy. Something large enough to shake the chimney bricks loose. The photographer whispered, Oh God, he's above us. Thomas shook his head. No. Another thud. He's everywhere. Suddenly, the lantern flickered back to life on its own. Even though no one touched it, a faint orange glow filled the cabin, and for a moment, that should never have existed. A shape formed on the far wall. A silhouette. Tall. Wrong. Moving without moving. Its outline flickered like it was caught on damaged film. Mrs. Holloway's voice cracked. I can see him, dear Lord. I can see him. Thomas smiled softly, almost proudly. You were never supposed to. The shadow grew taller, narrower, twisting into something that barely resembled human shape. Then, in the faint lantern glow, its head snapped toward the photographer. Everyone froze. The shadow raised its arm. The fingers were too long, too thin, like ink trying to form bones. It pointed at him. The photographer fell to the floor, backing away. He wants me to take another picture, doesn't he? Thomas nodded. He wants one that shows his true face. The photographer shook violently. And what happens if I do? Thomas answered coldly. You become part of it. Another heavy thud hit the roof. Then another. Then from the left wall. Then the right. The cabin suddenly felt like it was being surrounded by dozens of the same creature. But Thomas corrected them. Not dozens. He slowly exhaled. Just him, moving faster than you can understand. The photographer looked at his ruined camera, voice cracking. I don't have any more plates. I can't take another picture. Thomas's head tilted in that unnatural way again. You don't need a camera. The photographer frowned. What do you mean? How else? A sound came from the fireplace. A faint tapping, like fingernails, inside the chimney. Everyone stared. Tap. 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 Elijah whimpered. No, 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 no. Soot spilled down onto the stones. A small hand pushed out from the darkness. Black. Thin. Child-sized. But not a child. It clawed its way down the chimney. Mrs. Holloway shrieked. The father fired into the fireplace. but the bullet passed through the creature's shadow-like form. Thomas stood up for the first time. When he spoke, his voice echoed like two voices overlapping. "He's here for his portrait." The photographer screamed, "I can't take it. I can't." Thomas looked him dead in the eyes. "You don't get to decide anymore." The creature finished crawling out of the fireplace, straightening into its impossible height, its head bending sideways to fit under the cabin roof. The lantern blew out. Darkness swallowed everything. And in the pitch black, Thomas whispered the final line of the night. "He's standing right in front of you." The darkness inside the cabin felt alive now, thick and suffocating, like it had weight, like it was made of wet cloth wrapped around every face. Elijah sobbed into his mother's chest. The father swung the empty rifle wildly, desperate, unable to see even his own hands. The photographer crouched on the floor, clutching his camera like a broken shield. His breath came in quick, shaking gasps. Something enormous breathed inches from his face, a slow inhale, a rattling exhale, as if lungs filled with mud and rot were struggling to function. He couldn't see it, couldn't even hear it move, but he could feel its presence towering over him. Thomas's voice drifted through the darkness. "Calm, too calm. Do you want to know the truth?" "The truth about the Holloway twins?" Mrs. Holloway sobbed. "Thomas, please stop talking to that thing." Thomas ignored her. "The truth about the other boy? The one the town said died in 1874? The cabin breathed again. No, the creature breathed again. A slow, hungry sound. The photographer whispered shakily. "What other boy?" Thomas stepped forward. His bare feet made no sound. "You came here to take a picture of a dead child, but that child wasn't dead." A faint glow returned, not from lanterns, not from candles, but from the creature. Its body began to emit a soft, sickly gray light, like moonlight filtered through old bones. Enough light to reveal everyone's faces. Enough light to reveal him. The creature stood over the photographer, taller than any man, but shaped almost like one, except for the limbs, too long, and the skin, too thin, and the face. God, the face looked like a child's skull stretched into adulthood. No eyes. Just dark sockets. A thin mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Elijah screamed. Mrs. Holloway dragged him back, shielding him with her arms. The father tried to fire again. Click. Empty. Thomas tilted his head. "Would you like to hear how he died?" The photographer shook violently, tears in his eyes. I don't care," Thomas continued anyway. "The Holloways had 3 sons, not 2. He pointed at Elijah and the father. "Your wife birthed the twins, and a 3rd boy," Mrs. Holloway wailed. "Stop!" "Thomas, please." But Thomas didn't stop. The 3rd one came first. Born too small. Born too weak. Crying without sound. Breathing without breath. A child who lived, but shouldn't have. The photographer stared. "What does that mean, shouldn't have?" Thomas smiled faintly, eyes reflecting the creature's sick light. "It means he didn't belong here." The creature slowly turned its head toward Mrs. Holloway, watching her cry. Watching her shake. Its face twitching. Thomas whispered, "They buried him alive on a cold morning in 1874. In a cedar box. He wasn't dead. Not yet," the father roared. "Lies! He died." "He was blue and still." Thomas nodded. "Yes, he was blue. And still. And cold." He leaned forward. "But he was breathing." Mrs. Holloway collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably. Thomas continued, as if reciting church scripture. "They buried the baby behind the barn. A small grave. No prayer. No blessing." His voice darkened. "No forgiveness." The creature took a step forward. Its enormous fingers brushed the photographer's chin. Cold. Fragile. "Dead," Thomas exhaled. He clawed his way out. Everyone froze. Thomas whispered, "The baby lived, and he kept growing, and growing, and growing." The photographer shook his head, horrified. "You're saying this thing standing in front of me, is a Holloway child?" Thomas's smile widened in a way no child could ever smile. "He is the firstborn Holloway son, the one you photographed in the funeral portrait." The father screamed in denial. Mrs. Holloway shrieked. Elijah buried his face in her skirt. The creature leaned closer, its breath cold enough to frost the photographer's eyelashes. Thomas went on. "He never died. He fell asleep in the dirt, and when he woke up, he wasn't a baby anymore." The cabin shook. The creature's mouth opened wider, a wet cracking sound, as if something inside was splitting to reveal something worse. "Thomas," the photographer gasped. "What does he want?" Thomas stepped toward him, eyes glowing. "He wants what every child wants." The creature's mouth hovered inches from the photographer's face. Thomas whispered, "A family portrait." The Holloway family had never been strangers to tragedy, but what happened in the winter of 1874 carved their name into the darkest corners of Missouri Ozarks folklore. It began with a funeral, but not the kind anyone expected. The town of Reeds Spring was already living in fear after the whispers about the Holloway twins, Gideon and Thaddeus, identical boys with the same pale eyes, the same eerie silence, and the same impossible habit of watching people without blinking. Folks avoided them. Animals refused to go near them. Preachers claimed they were born under a wrong moon. But episode 6 isn't about the twins' strange habits. It's about their younger brother, Eli Holloway, and the photograph that should have been impossible. Eli died on January 3, 1874, or so the town believed. Pneumonia had taken countless children in the Ozarks, and Eli's stillness, the coldness of his skin, the final ragged breath, everything pointed to the same end. The mother, Lucinda Holloway, insisted on one last portrait, a common practice back then. The dead were photographed to preserve their memory, posed to look as alive as possible. The photographer, Mr. Colton Reeves, had done hundreds of these mourning portraits, but this was the first time he flinched before touching the subject. Eli's eyelids didn't shut completely. His lips seemed slightly parted, and the body felt warm. Reeves chalked it up to his imagination. The cold weather, the dim lanterns, the eerie stillness of the Holloway home. But the twins stood behind him the entire time, never speaking a word, never blinking. Reeves claimed he could hear them breathing in perfect synchronization, like two lungs sharing one body. When he lifted Eli's chin to pose him, something happened. A breath. Soft. Warm. Right against Reeves's wrist. He yanked his hand back, knocking over his tripod. Lucinda Holloway screamed at him for disrespecting the dead. The father demanded he finish the job. The twins simply leaned closer to the body, as if listening. Reeves tried again, and that's when Eli's fingers twitched. Not a death spasm, not settling of muscles. A deliberate reach. Reeves wanted to run, but before he could, the father closed the door and locked it. "Take the goddamn picture," the father growled. The twins whispered in unison. "He's not dead yet." It was the first time anyone had ever heard them speak. Reeves realized something horrifying. Eli wasn't only breathing, he was following him with his eyes, half open, cloudy, but moving, tracking. Reeves snapped the photograph in pure panic. The flash powder ignited, lighting the room with a harsh white glow. And in that split second, Eli sat up. The photograph captured it. A dead boy sitting up, eyes open, mouth stretched in a voiceless scream. Reeves stumbled backward, tripping over a chair. Lucinda fainted. The father froze in shock. But the twins? They calmly walked to Eli and held his hands, almost welcoming him back. Eli's chest rose sharply. Once, twice. And then, he stopped again. Stillness, silence. This time, truly dead. But the damage was done. When Reeves developed the picture days later, the image nearly drove him mad. Eli was not only sitting upright, a shadow stood behind the twins. Tall, bent, human-shaped, but wrong. The twins' eyes in the photograph were pitch black, not dark, not shadowed. Black, like two empty holes punched through their faces. Reeves fled the Ozarks the same night and never returned. Years later, dying in an asylum, he screamed the same sentence over and over. It wasn't a boy breathing. It was something wearing the boy. Locals claim the Holloway funeral portrait still exists, hidden in a sealed wooden box buried somewhere near the old Holloway property. Some say opening it invites the shadow back. Some say the twins were never human in the first place. And some say that on cold nights, if you look toward the abandoned Holloway house, you can still hear a child breathing, where no living child remains. Snow had begun melting in the Ozark Hills by the time whispers of the Holloway funeral portrait spread beyond Reeds Spring. The story should have stayed an isolated tragedy, a dead child sitting upright in his own post-mortem photograph, a photographer fleeing in terror, twins speaking for the first time. People in town said the Holloway property changed, as if the land itself had begun breathing. The woods behind the house, usually dead silent in winter, suddenly echoed with soft, rhythmic gasps. Hunters reported feeling watched. Horses bucked violently near the fence. Children refused to walk past the Holloway lane, saying they heard someone whispering their names from inside the trees. And then, the dreams began. At first, just the Holloway parents. Then the neighbors. Then the entire hollow. Everyone dreamed of the same thing. A small boy standing in the corner of their room, eyes cloudy, chest rising and falling in slow, deliberate breaths. Eli Holloway. But in the dream, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood something tall. A figure with a hunched back, long arms, and a head that nearly scraped the ceiling. Its face was stretched, almost human, almost animal, almost something trying to imitate both. The figure never moved. It just breathed. Long, rattling breaths that crawled across the dreamer's skin. Every single person who had the dream woke up gasping, lungs burning, as if they had forgotten how to breathe on their own. And the Holloway twins, they didn't sleep at all. They stood outside at night, barefoot in the frost, facing the woods, waiting, whispering to someone no one else could see. One night, a neighbor, Abel Goshen, decided he'd had enough. Children were terrified, livestock were dying, and every man in town felt the same suffocating pressure in their chest at night. Abel gathered a small group of men with lanterns, rifles, and Bibles and marched toward the Holloway home. They didn't plan violence, only answers, but the moment they stepped onto the property, everything changed. The air grew thick, heavy, wet, like the whole hollow was exhaling at once. Abel lifted his lantern and saw the twins standing perfectly still in the front yard facing the woods, their hands clasped as if in prayer. Their eyes were wide open, pupils dilated until they were nothing but black circles. Abel called out to them. The twins answered without turning. "He wants Eli back." The men froze. "Who?" Abel asked. And then, for the second time in their lives, the Holloway twins spoke in unison. "The one who breathes for the dead." A cold wind rolled across the yard, extinguishing every lantern except Abel's. The trees behind the house shuddered, not from wind, but from something moving between them. Something big. Leaves crackled. Branches bowed. Snow slid from limbs as though pushed aside by enormous shoulders. And then breathing. Slow? Deep. Rattling. Coming from everywhere at once, Abel Goshen, a man who had killed bears with his own hands, fell to his knees, clutching his chest. He gasped for air, choking, as though something invisible was squeezing the breath out of him. The men tried to help him, but before they could, the woods fell silent. Completely, unnaturally silent. The kind of silence that means something is standing right behind you. Abel looked up and saw Eli, not the sickly boy they buried, not the limp body they dressed for a funeral photo. This Eli was standing in the snow, bare feet purple, eyes white and lifeless, yet breathing slow, steady, powerful breaths that sent steam curling from his mouth. Behind him stood the tall figure. Its shape clearer now. Its spine bent, its chest rising and falling in sync with Eli's. Abel whispered a single word, "Lord." The figure leaned forward, stretching its neck, its head tilting with unnatural stiffness, like something learning how a human should move. The twins stepped toward Eli, smiling faintly. "He's awake," they whispered. Eli opened his mouth and breathed out. The steam from his breath swept across Abel and the men, and every one of them collapsed, gasping, choking, clutching their throats. But Eli wasn't suffocating them. He was taking something back. Breath, life, warmth. As Abel crawled backward in the snow, he watched in horror as Eli inhaled deeply, the steam from every man's mouth drifting toward him, drawn into his lungs like smoke. The tall figure behind him lifted its head and inhaled too. The woods responded, branches groaning, snow lifting from the ground, the air vibrating like the world itself was breathing along with them. Abel was the only one who survived. He woke hours later with frostbitten fingers, lungs burning, and the terrible memory of what he saw. He tried to warn the town. He tried to lead the sheriff back to the Holloway home. But when they arrived, the house was empty. The parents gone. The twins gone. Eli's body gone, as if they had never been there. Only one thing remained. In the snow near the woods, 2 sets of small footprints and a third set much larger. Deep. Sunken. Inhuman. Heading into the trees, the Holloway family vanished that night. And according to Ozark folklore, something else walked out of the woods in their place. Something that breathed for the dead. 3 days after the Holloway home was found abandoned, Reed Spring became a town drowning in paranoia. Doors were barred at sundown. Windows were nailed shut. No one walked alone. No one slept without a Bible pressed to their chest. But fear wasn't the worst part. It was the breathing. At night, the hollow inhaled and exhaled like a living creature. Long, heavy breaths rolling across the valley, swelling through the trees, shaking dust from rafters. Babies cried uncontrollably. Dogs tore at their own leashes, trying to escape something no one could see. Every morning, people woke with lungs aching, as if someone, or something, had been practicing breathing through them while they slept. Episode 8 begins with the only man brave, or foolish, enough to investigate further. Dr. Abram Kincaid, the traveling coroner who had examined Eli Holloway's supposedly dead body. Kincaid was a man of science, not superstition. He didn't believe in curses, ghosts, or creatures that breathed through the living. But he did believe in one thing. Bodies don't breathe after death. Not unless something forces them to. So on a freezing January evening, Kincaid returned to the Holloway property alone. He brought surgical tools, kerosene lanterns, and a journal filled with frantic notes about post-mortem respiration and anomalous chest expansion. He expected empty rooms and maybe signs of animal scavenging. He did not expect what he found. The house smelled wrong: damp wood, mold, and something metallic, like dried blood and cold breath. The kitchen was untouched, plates still on the table. The chairs, however, were all fallen over except one. A child's chair, perfectly upright, facing the basement door. Kincaid felt a pressure building in his own chest, the same awful heaviness the townsfolk had complained about. He opened the basement door. Warm air hit his face. Warm, from a basement that had no heat source. He lifted his lantern and stepped down. The steps groaned under his weight, but the breathing, God, the breathing, drowned out everything. Slow, dragging inhales that rattled the lantern glass, exhales that blew dust from shelves. Kincaid reached the bottom step and froze. The basement was covered in drawings. Dozens. Hundreds. Crayons, charcoal, ash, fingertips smeared on walls and floors. Children's drawings of a tall figure crouched behind a small boy. The drawings showed the figure leaning forward, pressing its face to the boy's mouth. Breathing for him. Breathing through him. One drawing showed the twins holding hands, smiling. Behind them, the tall creature stretched its arm across their backs as though claiming them. Then Kincaid saw something worse. The coffin. Eli's coffin. The lid was torn off, splinters everywhere. Inside were fingernail marks, deep, frantic scratches where a child had clawed at the wood from the inside. Eli had woken up underground. He had tried to escape, and something else had helped him finish the job. Kincaid stepped closer. The air grew hotter, moist. Breathing, he turned, lantern shaking violently. There, in the far corner, stood the Holloway Twins. Barefoot, pale, eyes glassy. Their shirts were smeared with dirt and something darker. Their hair was wet, dripping onto their shoulders. But their expressions, blank, serene, were what froze Kincaid in place. The twins whispered. "He's hungry again." Kincaid backed up toward the stairs. "Where is Eli?" he demanded. They blinked slowly, almost lovingly. "He's breathing." The lantern flame flickered, not from wind, but from exhalation. A long, slow breath rolled through the basement, vibrating in the floorboards. Kincaid turned his lantern toward the darkest corner. There he saw something moving. Not stepping, not crawling, sliding. A small shape emerged first. A boy-sized shape, dragging its feet, head tilted unnaturally. Eli Holloway. His skin was gray-blue, lips cracked, eyes milky, but his chest rose and fell in steady, powerful breaths far too strong for a dead body. Behind him, the tall figure unfolded from the shadows. Its limbs were impossibly long, stretching like softened bone. Its face was blank, smooth, pale, except for 3 dark indentations where eyes and a mouth should be. It leaned closer to Eli. The boy inhaled. The creature inhaled with him. Perfect synchronization. Kincaid choked as a sudden vacuum pulled the air from his lungs. He staggered, gasping, collapsing onto one knee as the creature's presence tore breath from the room. Eli exhaled. A warm wave that smelled of soil and sickness and something old. The twins stepped aside, lowering themselves to the floor, bowing their heads. Kincaid tried to run, made it up 2 steps, then stopped suddenly when a hand, small, cold, closed around his ankle. Eli, his grip was impossibly strong. His cloudy eyes stared blankly. His chest rose and fell with inhuman calm. Kincaid screamed as his breath was pulled from his lungs. His vision dimmed, pressure crushing his ribs from the inside. The creature leaned forward, its blank face inches from Kincaid's. Kincaid collapsed, but did not die. The creature released him as if unsatisfied. Eli stepped back into the darkness. The twins followed him, disappearing deeper into the basement. The breathing faded. The heat vanished, and Kincaid found himself alone. He crawled out of the house on shaking limbs, lungs screaming for air. By sunrise, he reached town, barely conscious, rambling about a creature that breathes life backward. A dead boy that needed lungs that weren't his. And twins who were becoming something else. He died 2 days later, not from wounds, not from exposure, but from suffocation. His lungs simply stopped. Not a single breath left in him. And now the town knew one terrible truth. The Holloway family wasn't hiding in the woods. They were hunting. Word of Dr. Kincaid's death spread through the Ozarks faster than frost over a window pane. It wasn't just the fact that he died. It was how. Every doctor who examined his corpse repeated the same horrifying phrase. His lungs are empty, not collapsed, not punctured, empty, like something had hollowed him out through his breath. The people of Reed Spring didn't sleep after that. They sat in circles with guns in their laps, lamps burning until the oil ran out. Men lined the church with blankets. Women prayed until their voices cracked. But the children suffered the most. Night after night, they woke screaming. Screaming about a small boy at the foot of their bed, breathing loudly, sometimes standing, sometimes crawling, always staring. Parents dismissed it as night terrors, until one morning, 5 houses reported the same thing. Small, wet footprints on their floors, leading to their children's rooms, and then back out toward the woods. Episode 9 begins with the one man who refused to be afraid, Sheriff Milton Graves, a Civil War veteran, stocky, stubborn, and too proud to believe in folklore. Graves didn't trust preachers, didn't trust doctors, didn't trust strange stories told by shaken men. But he trusted evidence, and the Holloway case had plenty of that. So on a cold February morning, he rounded up a search party, 7 armed men, and rode into the hollow. Snow crunched beneath their horses' hooves as they entered the stretch of forest where the Holloway family had disappeared. The woods were unnaturally warm. That was the first sign. The second was the sound. Breathing. Not loud this time, but everywhere. Soft, rhythmic inhalations drifting between the trees, echoing under the bark, whispering through roots. The men dismounted, rifles drawn. Spread out, Graves ordered, jaw tight. But they didn't have time to move. Something ran past them, fast. Low to the ground. Small. A shrill, childlike gasp echoed to their right. Another behind them. Then in front of them. 3 sets of breaths. 3 different rhythms. The twins. And Eli. Graves lifted his rifle. Show yourselves. Silence. Then, from deep within the trees, we're here. The twins stepped out first. Their faces were twisted, not by injury, not by fear, but by something trying to smile using human muscles that no longer wanted to obey. Their arms hung slightly too long. Their joints bulged. Their breath misted in calm, slow clouds. Graves held his gun steady. Where's your brother? The twins didn't answer, because Eli stepped out behind them. He was smaller than before, thinner, his ribs visible under blue-gray skin, but his breathing was stronger. Deeper, more controlled. He inhaled with a rattling hunger, exhaled with a hiss that fluttered loose snow into swirls around his feet. The creature followed, not beside him, attached to him, a towering mass of pale, twisted limbs emerging from the trees, hunched so low its arms dragged across the ground. Its chest expanded grotesquely with every breath Eli took. Its long, blank face hung over the boy like a mask stitched to shadow. Graves steadied his aim. The creature inhaled, and every man gasped at once, clutching their chests. Graves fired, the gunshot cracking through the forest. But the bullet slowed mid-air, drifting like it was sinking into thick water. It never reached the creature. Eli blinked, tilted his head, and inhaled sharply. The gunpowder smoke from the rifle shot twisted in the air, sucked straight into the child's lungs. Graves staggered backward, choking on nothing. The men panicked, firing wildly, bullets dropping into snow like stones. The twins stepped forward, hands outstretched. You can't hurt him, they whispered. He carries their breath now. Graves tried to retreat, but the moment he turned, he saw movement in the trees, dozens of shapes watching from the shadows. Not people, not animals. Something else. Eli's breath drifted toward them, and they stirred. All those who died here, the twins said softly. He found their breath. Their last breath. Their final exhale. The creature leaned forward, its long fingers brushing Eli's shoulders, and he keeps them alive inside him. Graves lifted his rifle one last time, but Eli opened his mouth and screamed. Not loud, not high-pitched. A deep, resonant, bone-cracking wail that knocked snow from branches and sent birds falling dead from the sky. The men dropped instantly. Some convulsed. Some clawed at their throats. Some lay perfectly still. Every one of them stopped breathing, except Graves. He crawled behind a fallen log, clutching his ribs, lungs burning. The creature turned away, guiding the twins and Eli deeper into the forest. Their silhouettes melted into the trees, swallowed by fog and shadow. The very last thing Graves saw before they disappeared. Eli turned back, looked directly at him, and mouthed the words, "Yours is next." Then the fog inhaled, collapsing like a lung drawing its first breath. Graves lost consciousness. He was found hours later by passing trappers, alive but barely, with his breath so shallow it almost wasn't there. When he finally spoke, his first words were, "They're not killing. They're collecting." By the time Sheriff Milton Graves awoke in the trapper's cabin, the town of Reed Spring had already begun to die. People weren't being attacked. They weren't disappearing. They weren't even being hunted. They were simply running out of breath. Dozens woke gasping, coughing, choking, lungs clawing for air that wasn't there. Babies stopped crying mid-wail. Old men collapsed while chopping wood, faces frozen in shock. Women fainted while drawing water from wells. Doctors couldn't explain it. Pastors blamed the devil. Neighbors blamed the Holloways. And all the while, the same 3 sets of footprints appeared every morning at the edge of the woods, small, barefoot, sinking deep into the snow. The Holloway Twins. And Eli, Graves stumbling back into town at dawn, wrapped in a blanket, eyes hollow, ribs aching with every breath. People gathered around him instantly. "What did you see? What took my son's breath? Are they coming here?" Graves tried to speak, but every inhale felt like a knife turning in his chest. Finally, he whispered, "They're not after us. They're after what we exhale." The townspeople stared, confused. "What does that mean?" Graves looked up, face trembling. "They're collecting breath to wake something else." That was when the ground shook. Just once, a deep, muffled thud, like something enormous taking a step beneath the soil. Windows rattled. Horses screamed. Birds fell silent. Everyone felt it. A heartbeat. A pulse, moving through the earth. The Holloway woods began to groan, trees bending as though pulled by invisible ropes. Then came the breathing. Not the creatures, not Eli's, not the twins. This breath was massive. Ancient. Deep enough to shake frost from roofs and crack the thin ice on the creek. The town reeled backward, terrified. A boy pointed. "Look!" At the far end of the hollow, fog swirled upward, twisting into a column of mist. Something inside it moved, something tall enough to blot out the treetops. Graves knew then. Eli was never the end of the story. Eli was the beginning. He gathered the remaining men, 20 farmers, a preacher, 2 hunters, and marched straight toward the hollow. They carried buckets of kerosene, axe handles, shotguns, and every Bible in town, but nothing could have prepared them for what they saw. The forest floor was torn, uprooted, disturbed like something enormous had been dragging itself underneath the soil for miles. Trees were snapped, footprints deep as graves filled with warm mist. Every few yards they found something worse. Dead animals with their lungs collapsed into flat husks. Birds frozen with beaks open wide. A deer still standing upright, skin pulled tight over its empty chest. Something was breathing through them. Something was learning. Graves heard the twins before he saw them. Their voices echoed through the trees, soft, rhythmic chanting, like they were reciting a lullaby taught by someone who had never heard a human voice. The search party rounded a bend and entered a clearing. There they were. The Holloway twins stood barefoot in the snow, hands clasped, faces serene, eyes rolled white. Eli lay on a stone slab in front of them, pale, cold, ribs rising and falling rapidly as if hyperventilating. And behind him, the creature, but now it was larger, much larger. Its limbs unfolded like unfurling wings. Its chest expanded and contracted in violent spasms. Its long, pale face was gone, replaced by something even more terrifying. A mouth. An enormous, vertical slit running down the center of its head, opening and closing with each monstrous breath. Inside that mouth were lungs, dozens of them, inflating and deflating, some small like a child's, some large like an ox's. The creature wasn't breathing. It was using the breaths of everything it had taken. The townsmen panicked. Some screamed. Some ran. Some dropped to their knees. Graves lifted his shotgun, but before he could fire, Eli sat upright. His milky eyes rolled toward the sheriff, and Eli inhaled. The forest bent inward. Snow rose from the ground. Lantern flames elongated into thin red lines, sucked forward like offerings. The creature leaned down. Its chest heaved, and it inhaled with Eli. The search party collapsed instantly. Men convulsed. Air ripped from their lungs. Their lips pulled open involuntarily. Their breaths left their bodies as swirling white vapor, drifting into Eli's chest, then into the creature's mouth. Graves clawed at the ground, trying to crawl toward Eli. Not to kill him. To save him. "Eli, stop. Please, this isn't you." For a moment, a flicker. Eli's expression changed. Like he wanted to answer, like he wasn't fully gone. Then the twins stepped behind Graves. Their hands closed around his shoulders. "He must breathe," they whispered. "He breathes for all of them now." Graves turned and saw the creature's chest expanding wider, 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 a massive lung consuming the entire clearing. Then, a single, deafening exhale. It knocked snow off the mountains. It shattered frozen branches. It threw graves 20 feet across the ground. When he looked up, the Holloway twins were gone. Eli was gone. The creature was gone. The clearing was empty. Only one thing remained: a single photograph lying in the snow. Crisp, untouched, perfectly preserved. A funeral portrait. The Holloway twins standing beside Eli. The mother behind them, all four staring directly at the camera. And behind them, looming, blurred, towering, the creature, breathing. That was the last known moment of the Holloway story. The last breath taken by Reed Spring before the town emptied out forever. Some say the creature still wanders the Ozarks. Some say the Holloway boys walk beside it. Some say Eli leads them, breathing softly in the dark. And some say, if you wake up in the middle of the night gasping for air, it's not because you stopped breathing. It's because something else has started. Some stories fade with time, but the tale of the Holloway twins never did. Because even now, more than a century later, hikers who wandered too deep into the Missouri Ozarks still report hearing soft footsteps in the leaves, matched perfectly, like two bodies moving in unison. Some claim they've seen a pale boy standing between the trees, his head tilted the same way it appeared in that funeral portrait, his chest rising and falling, as if struggling to remember how to breathe. Local sheriffs dismiss it as folklore. Old-timers swear it's real, and the land around the old Holloway cabin? No one lives there. No one stays the night. Most don't even drive past it. But every few years, another story comes out. A missing hunter. A mangled deer carcass. Or a photograph someone swears they never took. A photo showing two tall silhouettes behind them, staring with those same unblinking eyes the Holloway twins were born with and died with and never stopped using. Whatever the Holloways awakened in 1874 didn't die in that cabin. It didn't die on the ground, either. Some things don't rot. Some things don't rest. Some things just wait. And if you ever hear light tapping on your window late at night, don't look. Don't open the curtains. Don't breathe too loudly, because the Holloway twins don't knock to come inside. They knock to see if you're still alive. And if you're not, they'll make sure you start breathing again.